Oh, did it?
So tell them just a couple of minutes, or a minute, we're going to start.
Yep, that worked. Getting ready to start here in less than 5 minutes. Just waiting for a couple other people to join the meeting.
Okay, everyone, my name is Matt Thompson, and we're going to start this meeting here in just about a minute, half a minute. Okay, if everyone could come gather around, I think we might start. Okay. My name is Matt Thompson, and I'm from Columbia, Missouri. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but what I'd like to do, lest Art never speak to me again, is open the meeting with a short prayer. If everyone could please bow your heads. Lord, we pray for your blessing over these good people in Franklin County, for the blessing of safety over this meeting and for all our travels home. We thank you for all the many blessings that you've given us. We ask you to please help those battling with addictions and dependencies. We to find the answers they were looking for and the power to resolve their problems in you. More than anything else, Lord, tonight we'd like to pray for the families represented in this room tonight that have lost their loved ones due to murder. We pray that you will be with them, you will let them feel the love and support in the community, that you will help them to find the justice that they so rightfully seek, and that you will let them know that their loved ones are safely there with you in a better place. Lord, finally we just pray that your will be done here in Franklin County as it is in heaven. There's a lot of you I've never met before. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm not actually a citizen of Franklin County. I became interested in this case because a person I know that has worked on very similar issues, very good person, Kelly Stewart, told me that I should go see Jeff Weinhaus. And so I went to see Jeff in jail, and I found him to be, the most interesting, intelligent, and God-fearing person. I enjoyed my time there with him so much I kept going back and back and back. And then, as I began looking into Jeff's case, first of all, I should say that I'm here speaking on behalf of myself, just for the record. I'm only speaking for myself. I don't belong, I'm not part of any party. I'm certainly not a part of any militia. I don't condone violence. I'm not advocating violence. I own one shotgun. I've never brought it to Franklin County. I'll never attempt to resist arrest. I come here in peace, and I think everyone else does too. But in talking and looking into Jeff's case, I thought maybe he caused a problem. And but the more I looked into it, I began to see clearly that there was an issue there with the case, that the prosecutors of Franklin County had knowingly, intentionally prosecuted Jeff for a crime that knew Jeff was not guilty of. Not only was Jeff not guilty of it, but it was a crime that did not exist. Assaulting federal officers. Nobody assaulted federal officers with a firearm. Nobody assaulted those, or state officers, I should say. Nobody assaulted them in any other way. They're fine. And then in talking to local people about this, I began to hear that, in other cases, people have died, people have been murdered. There's no question about whether they were murdered or whether they died on accident. We can see that they were murdered. There was a homicide. We know who did it. But yet, no one was prosecuted. And I wrote the Attorney General's letter from Kristi, also wrote the Attorney General. Several others have written the Attorney General. I'm sure everyone got the same form letter back regarding the issues regarding the prosecutor in Franklin County. And this is from the Lieutenant Attorney General of the Office of the Attorney General of Missouri.
I'm sure there's too much echo. Comments.
There was a form letter that I received from Josh Hawley's office also, and said the exact same thing, and said this is a local issue. Any corruption that occurred there is for the citizens of Franklin County to deal with. And so we're here talking to the citizens of Franklin County about it today. And this is from a speech in 1940. I don't know if anybody can see that, but a speech was given to a gathering of U.S. attorneys by Robert Jackson. And he called the power of the prosecutor, the power to charge, the most dangerous power of the prosecutor. Warning that prosecutors have more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America. Charging power is an immense power to strike at citizens, not with mere individual strength, but with all the force of government itself. Here's from Angela Davis. I'm saying this because I want people to understand this is not the only place that problems similar to this have occurred. Prosecutors are the most powerful officials in the American criminal system. The decisions they make, particularly the charging and plea bargaining decisions, control the operation of the system and often predetermine the outcome of criminal cases. Prosecutorial power is vast and unrestrained, and the mechanisms that purport to hold prosecutors accountable are weak and often totally ineffective. In addition, the most important prosecutorial decisions are made behind closed doors away from public scrutiny, and thus immune from public accountability. So this is why we're here today. We want people to know that the public is beginning to wake up and wants to hold them accountable. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," and it is. When it happens to one person and it goes unchecked, it can happen to more and more. Our forefathers of this country put the faith in us. They said that the power didn't come from them. Said that our natural rights, all men are created equal, and that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that one needs a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that in order to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, drawing their power from us. Jeff Weinhaus, the bulletin man. This county, Crawford County to the south, Jefferson County, he was around Bourbon. He was very active in issuing bulletins talking about government corruption. And our forefathers wrote into the First Amendment a key thing that they wrote into freedom of the press. We all talk about freedom of the press. I think some people today think of the press, they think of CNN or credentialed journalists that have a press pass that can get into places. And our forefathers never thought like that. Most of them wrote their own journals. They wrote their own pamphlets, leaflets. Thomas Jefferson wrote that the basis of our government being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. And were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. He published papers himself. So did Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin said, "I am for freedom of the press and against all violations of the Constitution to silence by force and not by reason the complaints or criticisms, just or unjust, of our citizens against the conduct of their agents." Just or unjust. So it doesn't matter. We have the right to criticize the government or officials, whether we're right or not. And this one, I'd like everyone to hear this one. It says, "Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people, who have a right from the frame of their nature to knowledge as their great Creator, who does nothing in vain, has given them understandings and a desire to know. Besides this, they have a right, an indisputable, inalienable, indefeasible, divine right, to that most dreaded and envied kind of knowledge. I mean, of the characters and conducts of their rulers. Rulers are no more than attorneys, agents, and trustees of the people. And if the cause, the interest, and the trust is insidiously betrayed or wantonly trifled away, the people have a right to revoke this authority that they themselves have deputized and to constitute other better agents, attorneys, and trustees." I mean, that's one of our founding fathers, the second president of the United States of America. And the way he writes, he sounds kind of like Jeff Weinhaus, doesn't he? Jeff Weinhaus, at the time, 2011, that this all started, he was writing in his bulletins. He was very concerned about corruption, mainly in Crawford County, not in Franklin County. And he was running for coroner in Crawford County because there had been deaths that he thought had not been properly investigated, and he suspected the authorities, some of them might have been involved. And he thought that if he could become the coroner of Crawford County, he could call for a special inquest to investigate these crimes. What followed, I think most of you know, people watching on the internet know, on September the 11th of 2012, Jeff Weinhaus was shot by the State Highway Patrol, and he's now serving 30 years in prison for the crime of assaulting the people that shot him. I think, you know, if you just read the stories, I can understand why anyone would think that Jeff Weinhaus might be guilty if they reported that he was confronting officials and that he was scaring them, threatening them. But I'm going to show you some evidence. I can understand why anybody in the community would think that he was innocent, but that he brought this on himself. But I cannot understand how the prosecutor thought it, because the prosecutor had all this evidence. So I'm not actually going to tell the story of Jeff tonight, the way this all came about, the shooting. I'm going to let the guy that shot him, Sergeant Henry Folsom, tell the story. You might need some volume. So anyway, there's clear audio of Sergeant Henry Folsom. He testified, and when he testified there, it's just a little bit too hard to hear. You want me to try it again?
Would you share your story about what happened yesterday? We'd like you to tell us what happened. Tell us the story as detailed as possible, if you would, please.
Okay.
Start where you like.
We had a staff meeting with Lieutenant George and Lieutenant George Knowles and Lieutenant Sally George and British Houston from OCAT the day before. We were still anticipating problems with Mr. Weinhaus because he had set a date that he was going to occupy the courthouse, and he would bounce back and forth as to which courthouse he was going to occupy. And in his latest one, he started talking about bringing an army. And so it was decided that we would all try to.
So he's talking about Jeff Weinhaus was going to occupy all these courthouses and an army, and it makes it sound like Jeff intended to blow up these places. You know, at the time there was this Occupy movement going on, and Jeff's idea was to get protesters to come to the courthouse, carry banners like that. That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about going there with tanks and off his mic. He's talking about going to the courthouse and protesting.
Or can get as much intelligence on him if we could. We might go so far as to put a GPS tracking device on his car and do some other things. So, and part of that was I was going to go and contact the prosecutor, Bob Parks, because he had a grand jury at the end of the month. And so I went and talked to Bob and I said, Bob, we need a favor so we don't have to beef up security in all these, 3 counties. We need to go ahead and issue a warrant for him because, I had served the search warrant at his house and he has some more pills and some marijuana, and I seized his computers, and it was going to be weeks before Jay Craig was done looking at the computers. So we went and got, Bob said he'd support that. He'd go and if I brought him a PC statement, he'd get it filed and we would pick him up. And then part of his condition alone was going to be that he'd be mentally evaluated.
Okay. Which courthouses was he planning on for?
I know that he had been doing probing type things. He had been showing up in the
Okay, so basically what he was saying here was, they were concerned because Jeff had put out this YouTube video which they thought was threatening. It was called "The Party's Over," and it was probably certainly a little more over the top than what I would have done, but it sounded a little bit like that statement that I read from John Adams a while ago. And they had called the FBI, and the FBI said there wasn't anything illegal. And they checked with everyone, and they said that there wasn't anything illegal. But the judge, Judge Parker, that Jeff had mentioned, felt like that was tampering with his ability to judge, and that they should go after him. So he's talking about how they were organizing to go to his house and do something about it.
5 local sheriffs that were going to be moving from one place to the other to look for him.
To serve the warrant?
To serve the warrant. Okay. And the plan was, in his writ, he said we had until the close of business on the 11th to give him his computers. So we took 2 FBI guys with us, and we stationed 2 patrol cars down on each location of the room where we was going to meet.
So they went to Jeff's house, and they got him outside, and they talked to him for about 35 minutes. He was just in his shorts and t-shirt, and he was unarmed. If they wanted to arrest him for that video, they could have arrested him right there. But they didn't do that. They went in, they said they smelled marijuana, and therefore they needed a search warrant. They went and got a search warrant. Apparently they called 3 different judges before they could get one. And the prosecutor that signed the search warrant was Robert Parks from Franklin County, because Jeff's house was in Franklin County. And Robert Parks notarized his own signature on the search warrant. And Missouri state law says that you have to have the local sheriff to execute a search warrant, which they neglected to do, so it was an illegal search. And it was the officer that Jeff had criticized was from Troop I of the Missouri State Patrol, who has no jurisdiction. This is really in Troop C of Missouri State Highway Patrol's district, but it must have been that neither the sheriff or the Troop C people wanted to help them do this. So this one officer at the Missouri Highway Patrol, who Jeff had been criticizing from Troop I, is the one that came over and did this with the help of Robert Parks. They got a search warrant. They went to his house and they took his computers. I'm not sure if they thought his computers were smoking marijuana, but on his computer was his next bulletin. It was going to be his 16th anniversary of the bulletin that he was putting out. And this bulletin was basically Jeff's livelihood, right? He made his money. He had advertisers that had paid him money counting on this bulletin going out. And they had his computers, which had the bulletin on it, and they wouldn't give them back. And they got him through an illegal search warrant. And Jeff needed those computers back. So that's why he agreed to what they did next.
And I called him on the phone, and I said, Jeff, I got your computers, and I need to get them back to you before we close business today. And he said to me, I don't trust you. And I said, well, I understand that, but I've got to give you your computers back. If you don't want them, I can go back to all of them. He said, no. He said, let's meet in a public place. And so we were already sitting there. And so I said, well, we've already kind of driven all the way over here. We just thought we'd meet you at that gas station up the road from your house there. And he said, yeah, that'll work. He said, well, I'm telling you, I'm going to call some of my people, and we're going to show up in force there. And I said, well, that isn't necessary. We just want to give you your computers back, and we don't want no problems still. And he said, well, I don't trust you. He said, I'm going to make a stop and talk to some people. He said, I'm in Union driving around. I'm going to make a stop, talk to some people, and then I'm going to meet you there. But I'm going to have backup. I said, okay. We'll be sitting here waiting, Jeff. Just want to give you your computers.
So you're on first name basis with this guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I during the search warrant, I interviewed him for quite a long time. So this guy, we ended up being there about 5-6 hours. So.
Talking to him?
And, yeah. So we were familiar with him. And we watched all his videos and everything before. So.
You got his cell phone number mentioned?
It is on Scott's DVCC phone.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to use mine because he's been emailing my patrol email, and I didn't want to give you my private phone. I do have his number, and it come right off his video where he says what his phone number is when he's talking to the colonel.
Okay.
Because he wants the colonel to call him back, or actually he's talking to the colonel's secretary, telling her he wants the colonel to call him back. And so I got the phone number from there. I also wrote it down on the man inside Scott's car before we left because I didn't have anything to write on. But we called him from the DVCC phone. Scott came here. We were sitting in the car. The FBI guys were right there. And, as far as I knew.
So they ordered him into this, or they asked him to come get his computers at the station. It's about 4 miles from here at the station down there. And under the guise that they were going to give him his computers back. It was by their own admission, all a ruse. They didn't even have his computers with them, and they didn't intend to give them back to him anytime soon. And they said it was because they wanted to arrest him for these charges of tampering with the judge, which they knew were bogus charges. They dropped those charges later because the video that he made said nothing illegal. But so, in my opinion, they did not intend to arrest him that day. If they wanted to arrest him, they could have arrested him a long time before. They intended to shoot him.
He was coming to meet us with the computers, and I honestly thought that he would be excited to get his computers back, and he may come. Of course, we had the arrest warrant and the original return. When I seized his computers, I had to take them to Cole County and get another warrant to have them searched in Cole County. So I had to return from that warrant that I needed to give to him. And so I had his arrest warrant, and I returned the packet in the folder. And when they said he was going to meet us, everybody got stationed, everybody was ready. It was about 10 or 15 minutes later is when he drove in.
Which way did he drive back?
He came from
St. Clair, or?
he came from St. Clair and came in this way. And he had most of, a lot of his personal stuff that we see at the warrant. Because Bruce Houston said, we went by while we were waiting for the FBI guys to meet us. They were 45 minutes away. So we had to kill a little time. And Scott went by, and we saw the green Subaru.
Right.
Well, I guess he had left after I called him, and I don't know if he was home or not when I called him. He said he was driving around the meeting, but somehow that green Subaru, was not there. It was there when we checked it, but a little while later he come pulling in it. So I don't know if he went around the other way, south, and came back and went the loop so he could come in the way he wanted to, but he came in from the south and turned into the parking lot.
The first exit entrance or the second?
The first, right there where we were. And we had positioned our car high in visibility to be able for him to see it in the road and appear that we were alone. And the FBI guys were underneath the awning of this store there. And and there was never anyone there. All of a sudden, before he showed up, these two guys pulled in with a flatbed truck, and they're standing on the back of it trying to fix the gutters. And so I immediately thought that they were the people that he said were coming. And then another guy pulled in, and so there was a total of 3 civilians walking around. And eventually one of them went and asked the FBI guys if they could move their car because they needed to get over to the side of the roof to check the gutters there, and they were kind of blocking it. So they moved their car, and I'd say about 2 minutes later is when he pulled in. And when he pulled in, he made a turn left into the first entrance, and we had our car positioned high up visibility on the road. Well, normally I thought he would just pull right in and stop beside us, and that's what I was anticipating. But when I saw him pull in, he gunned it, and he turned around and drove completely around behind us, and then came up where he positioned his car in front of us like he could drive away real quick if something was wrong. And so at that point I had a folder in my hand, and we got out, and I crossed the back of our patrol car because I was on the passenger side, and I started to approach his vehicle from the driver's side. And he ripped open the door and threw off the seatbelt like they trained you to do in the academy. I mean, he wanted that belt off. He was out on his feet, staring back at us.
You know, he's kind of talking nonsense there. You know, he's saying that Jeff was gunning his car as he drove up to him, and I think you'll see in the video a little bit later, and he's talking about ripping off his seatbelt and this kind of stuff. You know, he's trying to characterize. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You can't rip the seatbelt off, can you? You have to push the button, and when you push the button, it flies off. What's he talking about? It's all trying to characterize it.
And I tried to make conversation with him, and I said, Jeff, I got your computers right here. And he said, oh yeah. And I said, something to that effect. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like he acknowledged that fact. And I said, yeah, I said, I got the papers right here. And Scott was that point was walking in front of me. And I didn't like the way that he bailed out and the way he positioned his car. I mean, at first I thought maybe he was going to try to ram us the way he was driving. Or maybe he was trying to see if we had surveillance by trying to get them to move in. And so I asked Scott, because he was in front of me, and I grabbed him by the shoulder and I said, go to the trunk of your car and open the trunk up. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And so I crossed over and went to the left rear driver's side of his vehicle. He was standing there and he was waiting with his gun side away. And he was standing at an angle. And he stepped out. He was really dressed up, which surprised me because the time that I've met him and seen him, he's like wearing t-shirts and, you know, holy shorts and everything. He was really dressed up. And so that kind of made me think like he was, you know, not going to do anything because he was dressed up like a business type thing. So I could not see his right side, and at that point, he was looking all around, and I stepped from behind the left rear of the car and started to approach him. His car? His car. Okay. And he is still with the driver's door open, standing in the V of the door in the car, and then he steps forward and closes the door, and then when he turned, I saw the gun. It was in a holster. It's an army green holster. I was serving in the Army for 7 years. They're very hard to draw from. They're made to retain the weapon, not to draw. And I saw it, and I saw a big black gun. And at that point, I said, because I was trained, whenever you get in a situation like that, you need to ask a person a question. Why is the sky blue? Is today your birthday? Anything. Because it slows their reaction time down. So I said, what are you doing with that gun, Jeff? And I stepped again back towards the car. Well,
Backwards, step forwards.
it would be backwards. I stepped backwards towards the car. And by then, at the same time I had stepped
Towards your patrol car?
towards the rear of his car. I went back to cover.
Right, okay.
Okay, and I drew my gun, and I pulled the sights up, and I only had one hand on it. And I was ordering him with my hand to get down on the ground. I told him to get down on the ground. And before I said, what are you doing with your gun? He said, what are you doing with yours? And I drew my weapon. I said, Jeff, get down on the ground. And I heard Scott yell, you know, get down on the ground. Because when I said, what are you doing with that gun? I mean, I screamed it. And because I wanted the FBI guys and Scott to know that he had a gun. And at that point, I raised my gun up, and I put my front sight blade right on his torso, and I could see those guys behind me. In my background was 2 gas pumps, an entire container of propane tanks, 2 civilian guys standing there, and I saw both the FBI agents had exited their car and were walking our way. And so my entire backside behind him was just people. And so at that point, he stepped and opened the holster. He drew down on the pull mechanism that opens the holster.
He stepped towards you, or?
He stepped away from his vehicle more to get that angle towards me. And so now he's about 3 steps away from his vehicle. And he's got that angle, and I seen him open the holster. He released the mechanism, and then rode the flap up with his hand. And
So what you're showing me with your hand on the side of your leg is he's pulling his hand up on the holster?
Well, the holster has a spring. First you have to pull down, and it releases. Then you have to sweep the entire flap away.
Okay.
And then you have to reach inside and draw the gun completely straight out. It doesn't have any breakaway. It's not cut down or anything. It's made to hold the gun if you jump out of an airplane.
Okay.
And
So what he was doing, he was pulling up. Had he already put the flap back?
he swept the flap down.
Okay.
You know, like when they teach you to sweep your jacket, he swept the flap. And then he was able to get his hand on the gun.
So at that point in time, he exposed his gun?
He already had the gun exposed. I could see it in the holster, and I had already asked him why he had the gun. At that point in time, he unsnapped the holster and placed his hand on the gun.
Okay.
Now, when it unsnaps, does it make a click or something, or some type of noise? Or?
I don't remember hearing it, but no, they're pretty quiet. And so, to be honest, that was this whole entire thing I was looking at.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everything, that's what I was looking at.
Sure.
So I knew that I had no shot. Scott was behind me somewhere. I knew he had no shot. So at that point, I chose to leave the cover and to change my position to get a better tactical angle where I could fire. And I took 2 steps out away from the car.
Away from his car?
Away from his car.
To the left or to the right?
To the left. And so now he's 1 step ahead of me here, and I'm here. And I still had a bad angle. I was at that point now, I'm aiming at the gas pumps.
Okay.
And so I took another step left. And during that time is when I told him to get down on the ground. And at that point, I had a clear backdrop. There was a big, huge tree, and there was nothing but yard, and right there, I had a good angle. And at that point, I said, Jeff, get your hand off the gun. And he said, you're going to have to shoot me, or something to that effect. And at that point, he began drawing the weapon out of the holster. And he had the weapon up in his hand, and he had just maybe all but 1 inch or 2 inches of the barrel out. You know, the barrel still hadn't cleared the holster, but the gun came out several inches because you have to draw that gun. It doesn't break away like a holster. You have to draw it all the way up to get it out.
Okay.
And so he was drawing it all the way out. At that point, I feared that my life and the life of everyone that was there at the gas station was in danger. And at that point, I got a good sight picture, and I fired 2 rounds to his chest and 1 round to his head. And when I fired the 2 rounds to his chest, I mean, it was immediate. It was just, and when I fired those rounds, I saw his eyes roll up in the back of his head, and he kind of swayed backwards. I then took another step left because those guys were still approaching. And at that point, I heard a gunshot. I mean, and I knew I didn't shoot it. And when I fired the 3 shots, all those guys over there started screaming. I could hear him yelling and screaming. And so I fired 3 shots, and after I heard the other shot, I scanned everything there, and I looked back at him. He still had his hand on the damn gun trying to pull it out, so I fired one last shot to his head. And I was probably maybe 6 feet from him. And at that point, when Scott...
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry this is so long, but I want people to understand. So this is what he testified right after at the time he testified this, was like 2 days after the incident. And that is the interview that was done, I think, by the State Highway Patrol. I think his officer, I can't remember the name, but I think it may be on the paperwork later. But this...
It was Scott that he kept from that.
Scott Mertens is the other statewide highway patrol that was there. And, you know, that was a little bit long, but what he said was that he saw Jeff originally on his left side and couldn't see a gun or anything because the gun was on the right side. And then when he got turned, he could see the gun. And he said that he told Jeff to take his hand off the gun. Well, first of all, he said that he had a bunch of papers in his hand and asked Jeff told Jeff that he was there to sign the papers and get ready to sign the papers. And then he said that he threw his partner, Scott, around and told him to go look in the trunk. And then he said that he, you know, this whole thing was taking a long time, and he looked at Jeff's left side and didn't see the gun, and then he saw the gun, and he told Jeff to take his hand off the gun, and then he shot him in the head.
Fired his round, he had already started to rotate a little bit. And so at that point, he had rotated his torso, kind of looking at Scott now, because Scott fired from an angle behind the car. His
Counterclockwise?
Yeah, he rotated counterclockwise. When I fired that last shot, he was rotating, but I put the front sight blade right on his head and squeezed the trigger. And so he fell down on the ground, and he landed pretty hard because he landed, looked like face first. At that point, I scanned again, and the FBI guys are running. And I started screaming, "Cover me, cover me, cover me." And the FBI guys took a position along the building, drew their weapons, and I reached in my back pocket, got my handcuffs out, and when I went to approach him, he still had his hand on the gun. His hand was still wrapped around the gun. He's laying forward on his abdomen. His hand's still on the gun. Well, I know how that holster releases. It has 2 clips, and it'll pop right off your belt. I reached in there and pulled the gun into the holster.
Okay, so basically, you know, he said that he told Jeff to get his hand off the gun. Jeff didn't get his hand off the gun. He was pulling his hand out. He pulled the gun out, and that's when he was shot. And he shot him twice, and Jeff was still standing there trying to shoot him again, and that's when he shot him in the head. And then he went, and he said that Jeff collapsed face first, which did happen. He did collapse face first onto the gravel with his butt kind of in the air, and he said that the gun was out and Jeff was still trying to reach the gun. Okay?
Does he not at one point in time maintain that the holster and the weapon were actually in the left hand? And on the left side of the body and not on the right side of the body as he would have everybody believe? And then secondly, he fired the 4th shot because he said that Scott fired the 3rd shot.
Right.
So that means that Jeff didn't fire any shots, but so he fired the 4th shot to the head, and Jeff was already twisting and going down. Is that correct?
Yeah, Jeff was hit twice in the chest and twice in the head.
But he establishes that the weapon and supposedly the holster and the weapon were on Jeff's left side.
No, he said that the holster was on the right side. He said at the very start, he was looking at his left side and he couldn't see the holster. And then he later got to where he could see Jeff, and Jeff pulled the gun with his right hand. I know.
He says that the holster was on Jeff's right side.
Yeah.
When the actual physical evidence was proved quite the opposite.
Yeah. He said that the holster was on Jeff's right side, and Jeff pulled it with his right hand. Jeff is right-handed, by the way. All right.
But he did have it though, he just didn't pull it out.
Well, I'll tell. Well, we're going to watch this video in a moment, because at the time this all happened, none of them knew that Jeff had one of those Google Watch camera things, and the Google Watch camera was actually on his left hand, and nobody knew about it until Jeff got to trial, and it came to discovery that there was a watch, and then they got the video off, and so the video shows that Folsom was lying here. I think I'll show you the video in a second. But what he's talking about is a parachute holster. So it's a very secure military holster. You couldn't even see the gun in it basically when it was closed, and it was difficult to get the gun out. It takes 2 different movements to get the gun. Yeah, you may know more than me, but it's difficult to get the gun out. And the parachute, Jeff told me, and I believe Jeff, that this is how it was. And from the evidence I've seen, I think it absolutely supports that. Jeff told me that the holster, he couldn't sit in the car with the seatbelt on with his holster on his right hip. And he's right-handed. So he cross-holstered it on his left hip. In other words, it was facing for a right-hand draw, but it was on his left hip. And it was in the holster. Okay, now this is Jeff's camera. Remember, this is on his left hand, so it goes crazy. It's not perfect. And like when he's driving the car, if he's turning the wheel, the camera's doing this, of course, and whatever he's doing, well, the camera's it's on his wrist, and but where he was talking about intent and all that kind of stuff. And Jeff was going to get more force to go attack them, and they were scared. Jeff actually told them who he was trying to get. He was trying to get a pastor to go with him because Jeff was scared, and he wanted a man of peace to go with him to keep him safe. Anyway, here's how it came down on Jeff's camera.
9/11/2012, Sergeant H.J. Folsom called me back and was supposed to give me my computer. Running around trying to find someone to go with me. I'm about to book an Acts. No, they can't do it. They're busy. So I'm seen alone today. Lord be with me.
Now, be mindful. I'm sure Jeff, there's a bit of bad language and maybe a couple things he might not wish he hadn't said on here, but he was scared. It is what it is.
turn okay now.
Hear that? God bless her. Val said, you better stop singing and start praying.
Lord, we have the prayers for the people. Heavenly Father, in the name of Jesus, Lord, I thank you, Lord, that no weapon formed against us shall prosper, Lord. Whatever these people are plotting, planning, if it's a terrorist, Lord, if it's not of you, Lord, cancel it, cast it down in Jesus' name. I thank you, Lord, for exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask to thank you, Lord. So well, please my cause, Lord, that it's driving to your body against the body of the take hold of the shield of buckler, Lord. Stand up for it. Stand up for it. Stand up for it. In Jesus' name we pray. All God's children say amen. All right.
So if you couldn't hear, basically he's just praying. He says, whatever they're going to try to do to me, Lord, cast it down, make it not work, stand for our defense, stand for our defense, stand for our defense. Did he gun the car when he drove in there?
No.
Rip his seat off, belt off, and that crazy?
Good, how are you? Why I got the gun? When you got the gun?
So there you have it. Took about 5 seconds or 6 seconds. I didn't count it. Don't hold me to exactly, but it wasn't very long.
13.
There was none of this walking around and throwing the papers and throwing Mertens over here and saying, Jeff, take your hand off the gun. None of that. Just shot him right there.
You still got the gun, Doug. I got it. Yeah, police, FBI, highway patrol. Come. Get an ambulance. Ambulance.
so you can't really hear right there, but Jeff's buddy, Sergeant Folsom's buddy George showed up, and he said something to the effect of, I told Jeff to get down on the ground. He had a gun in his holster. He said, "You got to shoot me." I shot him right there. That's what it sounded like to me, like he said.
Did you say this was shown in court?
Say this again?
Did you say this was shown in court?
This was shown in court, but a lot of the other stuff wasn't, and it was, the jury was so skewed, and for several reasons that I'm going to show here shortly, that it was totally out of context.
What I just saw on video was murder.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was
I saw a man
It
shot.
was an
for no reason.
assassination.
attempted murder. Yep.
But the jury was
And
given
what he
so much
said
other
was, you don't
evidence.
have to shoot me. He didn't say you're gonna have to shoot me.
Right.
And it came down to the officer's word. He stood up and said, "You're gonna have to," and it was officer's word versus his word. And that's the
Well,
only piece of
they
evidence.
should listen to this.
Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter, does it? He was shot and he wasn't pulling his gun out. Whichever. I asked Jeff what he said, and Jeff, he doesn't know. He doesn't remember anything from that day.
When he was shot in the head, I don't think
why
I
it's
remember
right.
either. That's what I heard.
And there's actually experts that have verified that that is what he said.
So, I don't have time to watch this whole thing, but in a second here, what he does is his partner, Folsom's talking on the phone, and all of a sudden you hear this moaning, Jeff's moaning. And you can hear his partner get really scared. He said, "He's not J4, he's not J4, which means he's not dead." And then they came and they rolled him over.
Yes, they did.
We're at the NFL station on Rock about a mile and a half away. We're about a mile up.
There's more of that stuff. In the testimony, you know, it talks about, for some reason, they're still trying to paint him to be a crazy man, talking about he's set up fighting the EMT people and all this stuff. There's no evidence of that on the video. One other thing I'm going to show you right after I take his question.
Well, there's no evidence that they had even done anything to try to administer first aid.
No. Keep in mind, he's laying, his face hit the gravel, face first with his hip up. And he's laying there all that time until he starts moaning and they say, "He's not J4, he's not J4. And then finally they turn him over. Now this is about...
How long was it? That was very long, wasn't it?
I don't know, it wasn't, but
I
a
was
couple
watching
minutes, it was
the
more than a
video,
minute.
When I could see the ambulance responded within 2 minutes.
8 minutes.
Yeah.
8 minutes?
It was
What did
8
you say?
minutes.
Okay. Just from the video footage.
Yeah, it
I
was
guess it was so.
So right through this period, he thinks they're holding his legs because he can't move his legs. He thinks somebody's holding them and they're not. You know, he's just out of it. He doesn't remember any of this, but that's what he's talking about. But I want you to see this guy that comes in here and what he says. You see that guy right there? Mm-hmm. He came in there and he looked down and he saw this parachute holster sitting there closed and flat. And he said, "Is that a gun in there?" Because he couldn't tell. Gun in the holster. I'll look at that later. I'll show you proof of it later. But basically, Folsom testified under oath in court that Jeff still had his hand on the gun after he was down, the gun was out, all that stuff. So, you know, it's probably a trivial point. Maybe it doesn't matter, but, you know, officers are supposed to know the law. We all know what the Second Amendment to the Constitution says. You know, he said, "What do you got the gun for, Jeff?" And Jeff said, I'm authorized to have the gun. Or Jeff said, I don't know, what do you have the gun for? And he said, well, I'm authorized to have the gun. And, you know, the Second Amendment says we're all authorized, lest there be any doubt. Here's what the state constitution of Missouri says. Article 1, Section 23, that the right of every citizen to keep and bear arms, ammunition, and accessories typical to the normal function of such arms in defense of home, person, family, property, or when lawfully summoned, shall not be questioned. Shall not be questioned. What was he doing? I mean, I don't know his history. I haven't studied that much, but he's not from Missouri. He has problems with geography, and obviously he hadn't studied the Missouri state law.
I have a question. I've never followed this case, but why is he in jail? What did they charge him with?
Okay, he was officially charged and convicted. He's in jail for 30 years on the charge of assaulting officers with a firearm.
By shooting them. When he's the one shot.
This shot?
Yes.
Yeah.
He is in jail 35 years for assaulting Sergeant Folsom by shooting him.
And Robert Parks had all this information. The jury only had parts of it. The public had very little of it. But Robert Parks knows all this stuff.
Robert Parks is corrupt.
He was railroaded in trial. He was absolutely railroaded.
Yeah, this was a crime that did not exist. There's no victim. Nobody assaulted those officers.
He's through appeals, but he keeps getting denied, and it's hard to get anybody to even take a real look at it. We've even got it on the governor's desk for clemency.
Is there another appeals process?
He's at what federal right now, Matt, or is he still in Missouri? He's on his second.
We've been calling the governor's office.
He's 6 years, and right now he doesn't have a year left physically if he doesn't get out.
What? Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I know enough about this case, and I've seen enough tonight that I'm fairly convinced that he's innocent. I don't think that voice needs to be pounded into the ground any farther. My question now is, where are these troopers? Where are they?
Yeah, where are these troopers?
I don't know.
Mertens is still working.
I know that one of them was eventually.
What I want to do, I want all of us to collectively go to the Missouri State Highway Patrol and ask their highest person, where are these men? And what happened here?
Right.
Yeah.
Martin's still working for the highway patrol.
And I don't know the answer. I know Folsom left, and I don't know why. Jeff says that he was fired because he failed to do his job, which was to kill him.
Yeah, he actually stepped down, claiming medical. He couldn't do it anymore. His department stood behind him, PTSD.
Was that Mertens?
Yes, that was Folsom.
Okay,
Mertens is still. I believe Mertens still working through the
Well,
highway
the
patrol.
other thing too is Folsom, this is not the first person he shot
Second
and killed.
person.
This is the second person he shot and
Under
murdered.
questionable circumstances. Cindy had a question.
Under
Matt.
questionable
Okay.
Well,
circumstances.
I was just going to tell him, I mean, I haven't watched everything, but I also watched one thing where there were actual witnesses that were at that highway cave store.
Yeah, so there was three guys, and you heard that earlier on the audio. Folsom was talking about, you know, they hoped nobody would be there, but there was three people there. And there was one of, they had gone to fix the gutters, and apparently a guy had hit the gutters on that gas station accidentally with his truck, and he went back to fix them. And he's a really good man, and he later did a video on YouTube saying that he saw this and it was murder, pure and simple.
He called it the
I don't know where he
execution.
is now. I'm hopeful that he's alive and hiding because he's fearful for his life, but I don't know where he is. I can't find him.
Is the video still there on YouTube?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And a person I know it wasn't there told me he never pulled a gun, and cops came out from behind the building in camouflage everywhere.
Right, they were hiding everywhere.
There was not two or three.
There was 2 FBI agents, 3 or 4 highway patrols, a
They all
sheriff's
came out
department,
everywhere.
St. Clair, Washington. Everybody was there
Yep, that's why they had the ambulance.
to deliver a warrant. Right.
So that slide that I'm showing there, and the next one, it's a little bit busy and it's going to be hard for you to read, but you can go find this yourself. But this is from the written testimony where he's talking about what I just said about him after Jeff fell, the gun was out, and that's him testifying that the gun was on the right side. It says that in his testimony right there, and it also says that the gun was out when he fell. So, Jeff recovered from all of this, and he went, they flew him to the hospital, and I guess God answered his prayer because, you know, it's a miracle. He was shot twice in the head and in the chest. He was at the hospital for about a month, and he walked out of the hospital on his own accord. He was never arrested during this period, and he went to stay with his brother for about 3 weeks, and then they arrested him. And Jeff says, and I believe it's true, that this is because they didn't want to pay his hospital bill. If they'd arrested him, they'd have had to pay the hospital bill. It was, well, it ended up being like $500,000. So in the trial, there were several trials. Jeff had very poor counsel. And I don't know, but it almost looks like he could have been working for the other side. He certainly failed in his duty to defend Jeff. Folsom's testimony was never impeached. You know, the defense attorney should have showed the information that I just showed you, impeaching his testimony. And FBI and other witnesses were left out. Remember, they talked about these FBI agents that were there in backup. And this is the testimony of both of those FBI agents.
On that issue, I'm sorry, on that issue we just had up there, isn't that also statute that agents come into the county, they actually, to do an arrest, they have to actually ask permission to the sheriff? Or ask courtesy.
Yeah, there is this.
Courtesy, give permission to the sheriff. Apparently, the sheriff comes.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone here, what he just said. They have to ask permission to come in from the local government, and that they should have had to get the local sheriff to go serve the warrant, which they failed to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Matt, I want to add something here that most people probably do not know. Eric and I attended this full trial. You have to understand the jury was primarily women. In the very beginning of the trial, they showed a video of Jeff talking about running and cussing out a judge in Crawford County and a bunch of other stuff. It was totally vulgar. That's his free speech. But the point being that poisoned the minds of the women in the jury. It's like a bell. You ready? The gong, you can't put the gong back in the bell. Now, that video, these women's mind was poisoned. The judge kicked it out later and told him to ignore it. Impossible to ignore it. It should have been a mistrial.
Yeah.
Judge Keith Sutherland is a piece of garbage.
And the reason they brought that in, they said, was to support this charge of tampering with the judge, which they proceeded to drop immediately. It's because they knew they couldn't support it. But that was the only reason for bringing the video in. Yeah, we got to keep going. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, okay. Yeah. So these slides here, this is important. These next two slides. These are the written testimony of the two FBI agents that witnessed this event. These are deposed FBI agents under oath. They say they only saw Jeff on his right side. They never saw a weapon. They saw Jeff's hands in front of him. They never saw him move for a weapon. That's the FBI agent testimony. Both of them. And the jury never got to see that.
That's not the prosecution's fault, that's the defense fault.
Yeah, that was a failure of the defense attorney.
Right.
Now, to me, the most shocking thing of the whole trial, when I first heard this, I thought, well, this is crazy talk. This doesn't happen. But it did happen. Jeff was fitted with shock cuffs that could deliver 80,000 volts. And anytime Jeff might look like he was going to speak, the jailer held the switch to the shock cuffs up. I literally could not believe this when I heard this. You know, the shock cuffs there is no, Jeff was in the jail, right? He was in prison clothes at the trial, handcuffed. He couldn't possibly hurt anybody, but that wasn't enough. They weren't afraid that he was going to hurt somebody. That's why they put the shock cuffs on him. They put the shock cuffs on him because they were afraid of what he might say.
Yeah.
Jeff does have an attorney, Warren Markowitz, who did a good job. He has filed a writ of habeas corpus petition, and he has included the use of the shock cuffs, and I think he was eloquent in the way that he described it in the habeas corpus petition, and he said, you know, that this is a mental restraint, not a physical restraint. So that is in a habeas corpus petition filed in federal court in St. Louis. Here's just an example. I got to looking around when I heard about this shock cuff thing. I thought that's crazy, but apparently it has occurred in other places. And here's one where it happened in Maryland, and the citizens got together and they prosecuted the judge that ordered this guy shocked. So basically, I mentioned there's two possible avenues that we're hoping one or the other one of them might help to get some justice for Jeff and get him out of jail. Obviously, he's in jail for a crime which did not exist. The first, as I mentioned, is Warren Markowitz has filed this writ of habeas corpus. It's with the magistrate now. There we can find no other information. We're not allowed to know anything else about when he might make a decision. But it's possible, you know, that Warren could would have to come to St. Louis and argue on his behalf, and so any money to his legal fund could help. I'll show you a sign of that, and yeah, go ahead.
Well, when you get down to the pardon application, the audience should understand that that's been initiated on a number of different occasions already, and it's just been patently ignored. It's not like it would be the first time that we asked the governor for a pardon, because we've asked 2 governors so far for a pardon, and it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, that's right. There is. It has been tried before, but you know, it was tried originally when Nixon was the governor, and you know, there's been hope that with the new governor. So there is actually a form that has to be filled out. You can't just call, I mean, you can call the governor, which there's been many campaigns calling, but to bring it through the official bureaucracy, there is a form to fill out. And Jeff has recently filled out and sent it in, and he's asked for full and unconditional pardon on the basis of manifest justice. And that will go into the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections will take 6 or 7 months and eventually get it on the governor's desk, no doubt with lots of information why the governor should not pardon Jeff Weinhaus. But I think it's a good time. That is officially in the system, and if you call the governor's office and let them know, I think it could be helpful. Go ahead.
So Jeff is the only person that can apply, fill out the pardon application?
He has to.
Everybody in this room, could we multiply that a million, theoretically?
No, it's on behalf of himself. He had to sign. I had to get it to him in prison, and he had to sign it. And
then we're impotent to do anything about it.
No, we can call the governor's office and tell them to support it, and tell them there's a different side to the story.
571-3222.
Has there been a march to the governor's office?
We're working on that.
Well, please call us.
Yep. Follow the Citizens for Positive Change on the website. Okay.
That there's been at least 3 governors have been made aware of this situation. Nixon, Graves, and Parsons. And apparently, I guess they don't have to do anything because the bureaucracy says only that Jeff is the only one that can do this, apparently.
Yeah, but
So they don't have to have honor.
No, they don't have to, but we can apply to heat.
Because after all, we have to follow the bureaucracy.
But it's my understanding now that this pardon application will eventually find its way to the governor's desk through the official channels, through the Department of Corrections. It'll have to get to his desk, at which point he'll have to either grant it or deny it.
Yeah.
This is, you can go to the internet. I told Warren I'd put this up here if you're interested in helping with legal defense. There's a site there. You can go and find a way to help Jeff's defense. And, you know, basically, They decided that Jeff was a troublemaker. And they decided that they were going to silence him because he was a troublemaker. And effectively, they have. They didn't kill him, but he's in jail where he can't publish periodicals criticizing him, criticizing government officials. But unfortunately, the trouble hasn't stopped. Things have only gotten worse. Because turns out Jeff wasn't the trouble in the first place. He was the only one reporting the trouble.
And we need to be.
And so now we're going to look at a couple other cases if we have time.
Yeah.
And we wanted to look at the case of Ken Allen and also Austin Lee Lusty.
I think we should do Austin's real quick if anybody's not
Yeah.
opposed to that, okay? Because his has really not gotten the exposure that Ken's has. Is anybody opposed to that? Okay. I'm going to be
You
speaking
have that
for him.
video, you have that
Okay.
video, Matt, right, that I sent you for Austin? I can pull it up on mine too.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you have a laptop? Yeah. We'll have to do it on yours.
Did you put that TV back in?
Washington is about how disappointed Mr. Department is in the bond hearing because he criticizes former Judge Wood for his dealing with the third individual, but yet he glosses over and totally denies the fact that Bob Parks took these three people from basically being at least charged with possibly at least second-degree murder, and he deals it all the way down to serving 7 years. But then because he gets to check the box on the form, they only got to serve 30% of that time. And he has the gall to criticize Judge Wood for the bond that they issued. This is just, I mean, what a piece of work.
You can't hook the phone up to that, can you?
With the phone? Yeah, it has to go through the Apple TV. I might can play it. It's just I don't know if I can play it from. Yeah, I might can play it from my. I might can play it from my iPad. You want to play it right now? Play it.
And it's been 113 days and the judge will still not rule on the file. You know why? Because I got Mr. Park right inside the little bitty tiny box. So they're going to Park to retire and they're going to try to just let the case go away. Stop for a second. And that's all because I raised my head about it saying.
Did you send that to me on Messenger?
No. And you know what? We never lost. As a matter of fact, we established those precedents. We were second to nothing. That we had a fundamental right to sue the government. And they were trying to tell us that we didn't have the right to sue. It took them 3 years going to the Supreme Court. He did the work. I was good enough to keep my mouth shut. But they ruled 7 to nothing. And that county counselor and everything had a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. Ta-da.
I'm angry at our prosecutor, Robert Parks, who is supposed to fight for our families, for the citizens of Franklin County, but yet has been known to make plea deals with the criminals and let murderers walk free. When I met him, he told me, "We are not CSI." When I asked why no fingerprints were taken, when I questioned things, he didn't even know the witness's name, kept saying the wrong name, and it appeared like he had never even read the files. And then I go from seeing that this man that he knew stabbed my son to death was facing second-degree murder charges to being told that there was nothing they could do because everybody told a different story. And then I asked for the case files, and I saw for myself what was said, and it is unbelievable the lies that are told, and the evidence that is right in front of you, all denied. We cannot allow this in Franklin County. Our children's lives matter. Our family members' lives matter. There are other cases. Ken Allen, Jeff Weinhaus, Daryl Johnson, Cassidy Hutchins, just to name a few. We have to stand up, Franklin County, and fight for justice. We have to fight for what is right. And we cannot allow this prosecutor to get away with what he is doing. Please don't wait till something happens to someone you love. Please help us and get involved in this and fight for what is right. On January 10th, 2016, my nephew, Austin Lusty, had his life taken at the young age of 24. He left behind a 2-year-old son. Austin, according to the autopsy, was stabbed through his vocal cords and in the left upper lobe of his lung. My sister, I guess about 3 months went by and she was never called by the victim's advocate, which was Jamie Pageant at the time. Nobody from Bob Park's office ever called. She actually had to start calling them. and numerous times actually, when finally they agreed to talk to the family. And we were told that no charges would be filed, although the original charge was second-degree murder and armed criminal action. He says, due to the fact that there were changing stories from the witnesses and that the suspect and his girlfriend's stories were the most believable. You know, we have a lot of problems with this case and a lot of theories, and we probably will never get the answers to what actually happened, but our biggest problem is the fact that it definitely wasn't self-defense. I think that you can take everybody's statement that was there and pretty much take the similarities and put it together and weed out the rest of it, and you start to get a story, you know? And numerous people are saying that Austin went outside the residence because this man and woman pulled up and they were in a domestic violence situation. One of the witnesses describes it as that it was so horrific sounding, like a horror film. And then he describes Austin's wounds later as that he'll never get it out of his mind, the horror that, you know, that he saw with the blood gushing everywhere. And I think what happened here is, you know, this man basically claimed from the beginning that it was self-defense because he says that everybody came out with bats. The problem with the story is that, you know, during his different interviews, I mean, we've got all the files, we've watched his interviews, read the statements, it changes, you know. It was 4 people or 5 people, it was a couple. When they did the evidence, there was 1 bat at the scene. When you put the story together, the bat that was at the scene was actually used by another person that was there after my nephew walked back into the house and they saw that he was bleeding. They state that they then grabbed the bat and went outside. But here's the issue with the whole case. These people are in a vehicle. She's driving. He's in this side. You know, he describes how they're fighting. He tries to grab her and pull her back in. Then he gets out and goes around to the driver's side. He describes in his statement that as he gets out of the vehicle, he gets his knife out. He flips the blade open. He can't tell the officers when they ask him anything my nephew said, anything that he'd done that was threatening. He can't tell them any details about anything. He doesn't know. Well, maybe he didn't have a knife or a bat. Maybe I thought maybe he did because of how he swung his arm. So you can't tell anybody anything someone said or any actions that they did, or you don't know if they had anything or they didn't. But you're in such fear for your life that you exit a vehicle and you fatally stab my nephew, and that's self-defense. That doesn't make sense to me.
No.
You're deliberately going towards someone and creating confrontation.
Using the safety of your vehicle to go towards the danger that's supposedly threatening your life.
You know, they asked him, why didn't you just leave? Oh, well, she had the keys. It doesn't matter who had the keys. You were both in the vehicle. You both jumped out of the vehicle. Now, you know, you can tell when you read the statements
that they try to compile it all together and act like, oh, well, these people came out with bats and I was afraid they were going to bust out my windshield. Okay, well, you start the car and you leave. You know, that's not what they did. There's a lot of theories that we have behind this case, and we might not be able to prove or disprove any of them, but the main problem we have from the very beginning is that he fled the scene. Her initial story was that she took him to Fast Trip in Sullivan and she dropped him off and he left on foot. She didn't know where he was. She was sure that he'd turn himself in shortly. He made statements in his interviews about how he went to Cuba to a residence there to hide. Why do you have to hide if you're innocent? If it's self-defense? Why do you leave the scene? And then what happened was, in one of the officer's statements, he says that he told her, you know, well, we'll be reviewing the Fast Trip footage and different things to make sure that your story is, you know, on the up and up. And then at that point, she started to cry and admitted that that was all a lie, you know. They didn't go to Fast Trip. He didn't get out. None of that. What they did was they fled the scene. He went to some residence in Cuba where they later arrested him, claimed he was gonna turn himself in later. They asked him what clothing he was wearing when all this happened. Well, this is the clothing I was wearing. How do we know? We don't know anything, except that this is what supposedly happened, that's self-defense. Bob Parks tells my sister and all of us when we're sitting there that because all the witnesses' statements were different and changing, and that these are the most believable. What's believable about them? Her initial thing that she did was lie.
But I have a question.
Sounds like the most convenient.
It sounds crazy and it don't even make sense, but so someone's dead. He was stabbed. They have the weapon?
He was stabbed. They had the weapon. He admits he stabbed him.
Okay,
he said
so
it was
even
self-defense.
If he stabbed him with a weapon.
Twice.
I mean, if they should file some type of charge.
Exactly, and that was our problem, because when we went,
It's manslaughter. It's voluntary.
I honestly
Something.
was, I was sad about it, but I honestly was expecting them to probably decrease it to something. You know how they do. And that would have upset me, but in no way was I even prepared for him to say there will be no charges filed.
There's something wrong.
And this is one of many. This is just one story of many in Franklin County of victims that have no justice.
And I've made his page. I mean, we've had a page for him for a while. And I've made his page public recently, so there's a lot more to this that, you know, you could
We're not going to be able to cover tonight.
go on. I mean, I can't really cover it all, but...
Question, Cindy, over there?
Yes. Well, you know, you got a felony going on right out there in the parking lot. Yeah. A woman's hollering and screaming.
Well, and that was another thing. They asked her that in her statements. They asked her, did you ask for help? Yes. She called for help.
Yeah.
Okay, she called for help. My nephew went to help her. But now, because she's the mother of his children and he's dead, it's self-defense.
Did they test the alleged perpetrator? Did they test them for drug ingestion?
Nothing.
No.
And that's the other thing. Bob
Yeah,
Parks
it's on the
says,
bottom.
The boy that was used in the latest case.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Whether or not they took the drugs and did the crime, or they did the crime and then took the drugs.
well, he admitted in his statements.
In another case, it just goes, well, if I just don't even bring charges, then I don't have to do any work.
Right, well, they asked him, and he said in his statements that they did ice and that they smoked marijuana, but yet Bob Parks tells us drugs aren't involved. How are they not involved? No fingerprints were taken of the scene. We have question about whether the story is even true, whether it even happened like anybody says, because I'll show you the crime scene photos in a minute. The blood outside, little tricklets. But that's where it happened. But he was stabbed in his vocal cords The man even says in his statement that even though he can't describe any, he said, well, did you grapple with each other? No. Well, did he say anything to you? No. He couldn't describe anything he said, any actions. He didn't know if he had anything or not, but he thought maybe he did because of how he swung. So he exits his vehicle. And he fatally stabs him in the throat, but he claims that after he stabbed my nephew, he says, oh, you got me. I don't think so. He didn't say anything. He couldn't talk. I mean, in the forensics report, it talks about how his right upper or left upper lobe, how there was aspiration of blood and hemorrhaging, and, you know, he was stabbed right into his vocal cords. The witnesses talk about how the blood was gushing everywhere. The only place you can see that is in the house. Outside, little trickles.
Cindy, isn't there a video somewhere where a cop made a phone call and says, well, we've got your boy?
Well, and that's the other problem, big problem we have with
and
this case.
And that isn't on the phone record.
Thank you, because I forgot to bring that up.
That is not on the phone
is
record.
One of the reasons we think nothing's been done with this case is because we think, from the very beginning, people were saying he's a confidential informant. Well, in the beginning, I didn't want to, I was like, whatever, you know. But here's the problem. After we got the stuff, I'm going through everything, she's going through stuff. And you can look all of a sudden, when you look at the booking photos, here's this man that they supposedly arrested for murder and armed criminal action, standing, here's the officer, here he is. He's not cuffed. The officer's got a firearm right there on his side. Okay. And then you see the officer, there's two, with the unlabeled pill bottle of some contents. Nobody mentions anything about nothing. And then one of the officers walks away from the table over to the telephone. I actually hooked it into my husband's amp, and you have to dub it up real loud. And you can hear him say, plain as day, we just sent these prints over on so-and-so, and we might have jumped the gun a little bit. Just tell us what you want us to do.
And
what does that mean?
Missing.
And then, most recently, this man has been arrested for a weapons charge. You can go to BindLink and find it. It shows you his inmate number. But when you go to Missouri Department of Corrections and you enter that, it pulls up nothing. If you go down on the disclaimer, it'll tell you that reasons why it might not pull it up, and it states local law enforcement might exclude them. So I'm kind of led to believe in that direction, that he might be an informant. You know, he might be being protected. That might be why Bob Parks doesn't want to mess with this case. But it's not right. And, you know, I mean, we're certainly not anti-law enforcement. My mom's whole side of her family is all law enforcement. But Marshfield ways in that direction. Yes.
The individual who said we might have jumped the gun and everything, is it conjecture of who he was talking to on the phone?
No, that's what I did. I looked at the time on the video because they supposedly gave us everything, even though there's a lot of blackouts and there's definitely things missing. But I looked at that time, and they did give us a printout of supposedly all the calls that were made in and out of the police station. I tried to go to that time. Doesn't exist. It's not there. I wanted to know, who is he talking to at this time, you know? It's not there.
It's like he was talking on the phone to nobody, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And see, if you do anything on that, you'll say, well, wait, this is on video here at this particular frame, but it's not on the call record. Well, everybody's not perfect. Maybe somebody failed to write that down. And where's the call record now? Well, they don't know. You have all that we have on the call record.
Well,
That's a lot of work.
can you see him make the call? Yes.
Yes.
You can see him,
You see him leave.
You can see it's not from his person.
No. It's a stand, and they're doing his fingerprints and all his booking. And then you see the one with the pill bottle, and they kind of just, you know, look at each other, but nothing's said. And then you see the other one walk away and go over to the far wall and get on the phone. So, this is the story, that it happened outside, that it was a domestic, you know, she asked for help, he came out there, okay.
Looks like it happened at the door.
But, these are the crime scene photos. This is in the house.
Is that at the door?
That's inside the living room.
One of the officers even states in his report that there was blood in the house that had been walked through numerous times. He also stated there was a witness there that one of the other witnesses yelled and said, "Don't say anything." Don't say anything about what? It was self-defense, right?
And they put all the witnesses into a room together alone instead of interviewing them separately right after one was threatened to silence. They put them all in a room together and left them alone.
And then to go and further process the scene. And then the witness there that threatened the other witness, they then determined they should all be driven to the police station and interviewed separately. That's what he said in the report. So what do? They allowed the witness that they named threatening the other one's brother to drive all of them to the Sullivan Police Department. So they're all in the same car and everybody's getting good on what the story's gonna be. At the same time that these people fled the scene, and I'm sure they can get a story together, but this is crazy. This is the house. And then later allowed them to clean their own crime scene. I've never heard of such a thing.
Turned it back over to them a couple hours after this happened.
This is outside, obviously, but look, where's the blood? I mean, I see a little trickle right there, but he was stabbed in the throat and they said blood was gushing everywhere.
All inside?
Yeah, in the house. There's even blood right here on this outlet plug-in.
Did anybody call, what did they call the ambulance for? Did anybody call the ambulance for it?
Well, that's the thing too. They said that the people in the house said that they had to go next door to, well, they said when they realized how serious my nephew's injuries were, that they tried to put him in the car, but it wouldn't start. Well, first of all, if I saw that much blood, I wouldn't be putting anyone in a car. I would be calling 911.
Well, you would if you were afraid the police were going to bust you for the drugs that you were at.
No, well, then I guess I would run through the house.
Blood on the car, but it doesn't really fit their story.
Yeah. And a big, you know, again, I don't understand the blood on the outlet thing. It's just.
And all the blood on the floor,
There's
none on the
one
walls or
match,
couches.
the only one they found, which coincides with one of the person's statements that says that he went out to, after the fact. But
I don't see any blood outside.
Yeah, and where that big puddle of blood is in the living room, it's not on the couch
only
or
thing
walls
I
or
see
anything else
outside.
around it, it's on the floor. And that wound standing up would have gushed everywhere. Whatever happened there happened while he was on the ground, in the living room, not outside.
Well, you can tell by the, I mean, I don't know, detective, did they get a detective on the scene?
This, what you see, the pictures, is about all they did. They didn't do any fingerprints, they didn't do
they did
any
nothing.
investigation.
And the first responders that came to the scene, the other thing is, this is the other really odd thing. They asked him, would you be surprised if I told you that he was stabbed twice? No, I only stabbed him once. Nobody knows anything about the second wound. The officer even said in his own statement that he didn't notice the second wound until they were loading him onto the stretcher. But yet he described the sound of it. How, I don't know.
Are you sure he was only stabbed twice? Well, because I think what I seen in the living room looked like he was stabbed right there because of the splashes of blood.
That's what we think too.
That came from the knife because.
And you can kind of see like a concentration of blood, and people were saying that prior to this supposed domestic thing that my nephew was on the couch sleeping, in the living room.
Which is right next to that puddle of blood.
You know?
They just pulled him off the couch and threw him down.
I think it was an attack,
stabbed
and
him on the
everybody was
ground.
saying at the funeral, even though they wouldn't elaborate, it was a setup, it was a setup of what?
And the whole reason not to press charges is because supposedly Austin was the aggressor who came outside and this was self-defense. That right there proves that is not true. That right there is enough for a trial to be started and fair process. That right there is enough.
The officer, there was a life flight helicopter that was actually on its way, and you can hear it on the audio. He tells them to stand down. He's going to Sullivan, Missouri Baptist.
Who don't even have doctors on.
Why? As soon as he got there, his blood pressure was, what, 70/40? All they were doing was trying to stabilize him to life flight him to Barnes. He could have been there. You know?
This crime scene was processed by Franklin County Sheriff, or was this
Sullivan Police Department.
in this way?
Yeah.
Not even
And
fingerprints
I'm
done
not
on
trying to be
weapons,
critical,
nothing.
but I mean, come on, how many murders do they handle? You know?
45 handled this one.
Yeah, I, without being disrespectful, I call them Mayberry people.
Probably enough information there to sue the Sullivan Police Department.
The decision to not prosecute or proceed with charges was on Robert Clark.
That's correct.
Right.
That's
Because
correct.
Sullivan did arrest him
They
with charges.
did arrest him and they
when
charged
it was
him with
handed
those
over
two
to
charges,
Parks.
but then they handed it over to Robert Parks,
Because they were state charges.
and then he said no charges would be filed.
Why is he still part of
Well, he is leaving, but he needs to answer for
There's
everything
outside,
he's done.
a close-up of the outside.
Yes, and the new prosecutor's gonna get all this stuff on his desk if we can get enough people.
They have to know we're
say,
watching.
This is bull.
We have to go to those court trials and show up and make these calls and.
Here's the car that they loaded him into when they realized how serious his injuries were.
And it was self-defense.
And if you look on that
Well,
side,
there's
you
a lot
can
of
see
blood in
the
the car.
You had to, you're guilty.
On the other side. Yeah, but they say he walked out to the car.
There's a lot of blood in that car.
They say that he walked out to the car and they loaded him.
If he had walked out to the car and got into his own after being stabbed.
Well, they put it through the window, you can tell that they rolled it up.
Yeah.
That window was down.
And you
That's
can
how
see the
blood
blood
went.
running down on that side.
That window was down.
He shoved him head first.
They shoved him in through the window, because you can tell, because the window, and then they put the window up.
I think they were trying to get rid of him.
Any person off the
I
street.
think that, to be honest, I think that's why they waited so long, and that's the other thing. They claim that they had to go to the neighbors to call 911 because no one had a phone. But the funny thing about it is, that's how my sister got to be at the hospital that night. She's minding her own business, and all of a sudden she gets a text that says, "Your son is dead."
Well, that girl said she, asked for help, called in to come, didn't she?
And
So
in
where'd she get a phone?
in the booking video afterwards in the lobby, they're all on their phones. You can see them in videos right after, all sitting on their cell phones.
Using the phones that they didn't have.
Right, right.
Who was the girl that asked for help again? Was it just a random girl that pulled up the drive?
It was his girlfriend.
Austin's
Austin's girl?
The man
No,
that
the
stabbed
man that
her.
stabbed
Oh,
Austin.
okay.
And they also had a 2-year-old little girl in the car with them.
Yeah.
When this all went down?
The man who murdered him, his girlfriend had their 2-year-old car in the girl. Or 2-year-old
No,
girl
they
in the
were
car.
in a red Ford Explorer. This is the car that they tried to load my nephew into to take him to the hospital.
I still think they tried to put him in there. I think they wanted to get rid of him. I don't think that's.
Well, and here's another real curious thing on the inside of the house. Get back to it.
In the car or in the house?
In the car.
Oh, the guy was in the car.
Had all the people, nobody had to work.
They did. Looking at the video, they all had phones on there at the police station, but that's what. It doesn't matter. It was.
See, there was little drops there, but that's going to the car.
And they didn't get the car to
There it is. It's a little closer one at that. Right there. That's interesting to me because that's my nephew's handprint in blood.
Yeah, he's trying to get away.
And so I'm not convinced that it didn't happen in the house because
It did.
it took a lot of force to break that sheetrock right there. I mean, and there's blood all over the house.
All over the house. It's everywhere.
But it was self-defense.
I ain't no way he did.
No, it's his handle.
That's the guy that died. You think? He was trying to just get out of there, you know. He was trying to get away. Huh? He's trying to get away.
We'll get some else.
There's no blood outside. Is that the next bit of blood?
I mean, it's even in there, in the hot water here, but it's in every room. Like a smear on the bathroom
He's
door.
trying to get.
Like it's,
Pictures, I think I'm seeing for the first time.
the most concentration is right there by the living room
I
couch.
actually have all this, but I didn't maybe look at all of it.
So, I mean,
That's what happened right there.
You can even see
What I am seeing right now.
but I appreciate everyone's time. I know, like I said, there's no way we can go through everything, but my thing is, we have a lot of theories that we may never be able to prove or disprove them, but the one thing that matters to me is, I think that at least it should have been brought before a grand jury. Let them decide.
And there's no reason.
I would think that it is, yeah.
This one was convinced against her. Same thing in the trial, and she didn't show up.
See, a lot of us didn't think, I mean, she's.
Forward, positively, because the Allen debacle, that's basically.
Well, we knew everybody had them, but then we heard,
What's gonna be the procedure once we get to the prosecuting attorney?
And then there's
I mean, just like we're interested with Jeff Weinhaus's pardon application, what possible constructive means can we do to influence the new prosecuting attorney to reopen his case?
Same thing to make a lot of noise.
That's what I was going to say. We didn't make noise.
Well, I think,
I was going to say something.
Jeff was talking about occupy the courthouse, and it made the state highway patrol nervous. But I mean, you don't have to go. You can peacefully go in and hang out outside his office, the new prosecutor, whatever. And I know that prosecutors are.
Hang out in front of the present prosecuting attorney's office.
No.
I would.
No.
You were screaming at him the other time.
I was screaming at him.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even accept my paperwork. I had to turn the paperwork in to the clerk and have it, because they wouldn't even accept my paperwork through the.
Can I get everybody's attention for just a
Do you want to?
second? Okay.
We
We're
gotta
time
find out
slot here.
what possibly.
We're time slot here. When we get to that, Dan's gonna here just to give a little bit of what he went through with his son, okay? And we will definitely start, we will call another meeting, all right? But we are going to start first.
About this, the
And
same scenario, play that out.
all right, so.
Public place.
Well, yeah, and I think Kristi has another petition. I mean,
Yeah, we got
had one in the beginning.
petition
We
for
got like
Austin,
over
petition
500
for Jeff.
signatures, and then she's got this new one.
We need to organize again, and we need to start making noise, and we need to do it as an organization.
Right, showing up at court trials, making calls, signing these petitions, holding
Bob
people
Hart's
accountable.
even told my sister, this
Right.
isn't CSI, we're not CSI. Well, I'm not CSI either, but I'm looking at the same files as them, and I can tell something's wrong.
And if you have this many increased murders in this issue and you can't handle it, then they need to bring CSI in.
I get the impression that Parks was almost like, what do you want me to do?
Vince, you want to say a few words about your?
That's what I believe.
I will say, I don't know, Vince is going to talk about something else, I think, but I don't know much about, the Ken Allen case, but what I know is very disturbing. And what I saw the other day on the news, they reported the protest at the courthouse, and they made it sound like it was this random home invasion thing. Like it was like totally random. Without mentioning, the issue with Kim Jones and some performance, and so, you know, they left a lot out of that story. I think there's something seriously
But it
wrong.
looks like there's just more continuation of bullshit cases. When I look at Weinhaus, I mean, I see what I saw was murder.
My impression correct, and when Bob Clark, after the first person was sentenced, and Bob started to try to wind his way out of what was happening with Judge Wright, that Judge Wright just basically said, just don't even bother to say another word.
Yes, it is.
Right, we said we're not
I
gonna
just
say
wanna make sure that I
anything
have
else
that
on the record. We said later on we talk about that, but don't even say anything else.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure.
Yep. That's just like the nurse boy. They give her a slap on the shoulder. You know, 5 years probation.
But we gotta do
Controlled substances.
we gotta do it if there's attorney coming in for the first time in 20 years, and we haven't all this thing is fire and say, okay, due process and accountability and this is
You did great. That's the best when you start ad-libbing like that. You did good.
Somebody else had a problem. And that's court. That's okay. Mark, you have anything?
But, okay, Art and I went to the municipal court on the legality of the municipal court. The whole series of okay. So suddenly, magically, the traffic ticket now stays over and I'm being prosecuted.
All right, thank you all for joining us.